So welcome everyone. Thanks everyone out there for tuning in. I'm excited about today's event and I know our viewers are too. So a quick introduction. I'm Brian Love, your co-moderator for today and head of depository recruiting at the Travillian Group, which is a boutique executive recruitment firm serving the financial services space since 1998. My division specifically covers community banks and community banks around the country, assisting with search and succession planning for boards, C-suite, and senior leadership teams. Please visit www.travilliangroup.com to learn more about our bank practice and current search engagements. While you're there, please sign up for our mailing list, which is always packed with informative content about our industry. You can also find us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or YouTube, where this webinar can be viewed in the future. So we'll get started with all the challenges and changes impacting banks today, from major technological shifts to the pandemic and the uncertainty of its aftermath. Culture has arguably never been more important or as highly correlated to strong fundamental performance, increased shareholder value, and the ability to attract and retain talent. But it can be a heavy lift, to say the least, to transform a company and develop a distinctive culture that is truly a difference maker. With us today are two leaders who have achieved that difficult transformation, and they're here to tell us how. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce our panelists. First, we have Ira Robbins, Chairman and CEO of Valley Bank in New Jersey. Welcome, Ira.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet. And from the other coast, Brent Beardall, President and CEO of WaFd Bank, based in Seattle, Washington. Welcome, Brent.
Brian, great to be here. It's an honor to serve on this panel with Ira, so happy to be here.
Glad to have you. Lastly, I want to introduce my co-moderator today, Joe Fenech. Joe, good to see you.
Good to see you too, Brian. I'm Joe Fenech, everyone, Chief Investment Officer of GenOp Capital Management, and I'm also a content contributor for the Travillian Group. So when Brian and I first talked about doing a webinar like this centered around culture, and we were debating who might be, best suited to talk to us about that, in my mind, the choice was an easy one. I've known Ira and Brent each for over 15 years. They've been with their companies for much longer than that. Ira, I think you're at 25 years or so with Valley. Brent for 20 years with WaFd. Brent was named CEO in 2017. Ira was appointed CEO in 2019. And really just in that short time since, what they've accomplished has been really remarkable, particularly with respect to cultural change. So operating on different sides of the country, as Brian mentioned, in Seattle and northern New Jersey. I don't think you two guys have ever met each other before 5 minutes ago, but great to see you both, and thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Maybe to start, I know a lot of our viewers are probably familiar with each of your companies. They're both larger banks, publicly traded, both well-known, both well-regarded. But for those that aren't quite as familiar, maybe take a couple minutes, each of you guys, if you wouldn't mind, and introduce your company, talk a little bit about the business model, the strategy. Brent, maybe if you want to lead off and then pass it to Ira, that'd be great.
Happy to do it. So Washington Federal Bank, and we do business as WaFd Bank, was established about 103 years ago in a small fishing village just north of Seattle, Ballard, Washington. And today we are about $19 billion in assets, 230 branches in 8 Western states, basically the West Coast except for California, and that's an entirely different conversation, but we stayed out of California intentionally. And what makes us unique is a couple of things. First of all, we're a portfolio lender. So every single mortgage loan we make, we keep on our books, which is very different than many others. And secondly, we're really trying to transform the bank from the legacy thrift we were for our first 90 years of doing business into a full-fledged commercial bank. So this last quarter, about 80% of our loan originations were commercial. So that's, as anyone in the business knows, that's a precarious proposition to transition from a thrift to a commercial bank. And we've done it very intentionally, very disciplined manner. And I'd say we're probably in the 7th or 8th inning in terms of transitioning to a commercial bank. One of the hallmarks of the bank is keeping our shareholders' perspective in mind. And just recently, one of the contributors to Motley Fool ranked companies in terms of total shareholder return since their IPO. And we went public in 1982, and WaFd Bank is number 7 on that list nationally with a total shareholder return of 15,800%. So I've got some big shoes to fill and some big responsibilities.
Thanks, Brent. Ira.
Thanks. Valley's been around not quite as long as WaFd. We've been around for about 94 years. Largely started in Northeast New Jersey as a commercial bank serving the local community. Since then, we've now grown into a $41 billion bank with about 250 or so branches across northern New Jersey into New York City, Long Island, and then down in Florida as well, and then 15 branches in the Alabama footprint. We like to think of ourselves as a relationship bank serving a commercial customer. And our focus has really been on defining what our value proposition is to our target customer segment, as opposed to being everything to everyone. As models and environment continues to evolve, how do we really focus in on providing a differentiated experience for our customers, targeted, and really being that sole provider of all their financial needs for an individual target. So our focus really has been on how do we produce low-cost back-end technology and operating expenses to help support what that relationship model looks like. And that's where the focus has been. As you said, I've been at the bank for 25 years, became president in 2016, and really shifted our management team in 2017 to have this different approach as to how we thought about what relevancy looks like for us.
Great overview, guys. Appreciate that. Maybe moving on here, each of you guys succeeded CEOs that you worked with for a long time, right? Jerry Lipkin at Valley, I always thought of as, a larger than life personality. I learned a lot from him over the years. Ira as an analyst, particularly in the area of credit and, sticking to your knitting when everybody else is doing something different and following the herd. I always thought Roy Whitehead at WaFd was really the consummate professional banker. Right. And the company was known under his leadership for its, tremendous efficiency. But at the time that each of you guys were appointed CEO, banking was also changing pretty rapidly. Right. So can you talk to us about how you handled that transition? How did you preserve what was good about what you inherited from the prior long-term leader? And then, but also at the same time, making it clear that, transformative change was also on tap. Maybe Ira and then Brent.
I mean, Jerry was a wonderful mentor to me. Jerry really had the values and ethics that you would want of any company. I remember sitting in an investor meeting back in 2007, 2008, being pushed to go into the subprime lending market. And Jerry was pounding on the table. This is not for us. It's not good for our communities. That's the type of culture that you want in any organization from a values and ethics perspective. I think where we got a little bit lost was not understanding what our value proposition was as a relationship bank. We were a great $4 billion bank, a challenged $15 billion bank, and really had no really sustainable value proposition as a $20 billion bank. And growing from 24 to $40 billion since I've been CEO has been really defining what our value proposition is and staying succinct as to what that is, making sure we all understand what we're rowing for in a specific direction. And I think that's been the biggest change. We had to make a significant amount of personnel changes day one when I first got here, even though I grew up in the organization. Like you said, I'd been here for 25 years. So understanding not hiring for today, but hiring for what we wanted to aspire to be was something that was a real focus. And going through that process was something that was time consuming, but I think we surrounded ourselves with a great team.
Yeah, and I'd follow up on that. Both of us followed really legends in the banking industry. Here at WaFd Bank, I have the good fortune of being only the 6th CEO in 103 years. So there's no pressure or anything. All I have to do is make it to 2037, not to take down the average. And that's a long time. Joe, you may not even have hair by the time we get to that point. But The key is having a complete buy-in, and that's buy-in from the outgoing CEO, it's buy-in from the board, and it's buy-in from you as the incoming CEO. I had the good fortune of working with Roy when he was transitioning to the CEO role in 2001. And to see some of the consternation that he went through at that time. And he actually said, Brent, take note and remind me of some of these things as we go through it. And one of the things that was key for us was a quick and a smooth transition. So we made the announcement, kind of like Ira, or I was put in as president several years beforehand, but for the CEO role, we made the announcement on January 1st, and it was effective April 1st. And then he stayed on the board as chairman only another 9 months or so. And his point was, you can't have two leaders, right? The company is used to coming to me as a leader. Now we need them to come to you. It's going to be really awkward and hard for a lot of people. So we need to, have a transition plan, have a relatively short time frame for that transition plan. But that takes somebody with all kinds of self-awareness in terms of the outgoing CEO. And to Roy's credit, and I'm sure Ira probably had a similar experience, he told me, he said, Brent, don't try to run the bank by asking yourself, what would Roy do? How would Roy make this decision? He's like, I've trained you, I've mentored you, I've given you the tools, you and the management team. I trust you and the board, do what you think is best. And to me, that's really valuable. And my wife reminded me to write that down myself, because it's really hard to transition out something that's really part of your DNA, who you are after you've been with the bank for so long a period of time. So to me, that is key, that everybody is on the same sheet of music, and you have a outgoing CEO that is willing to cut it off fairly quickly and really hand over control to the incoming management.
Well, it sounds like Roy and Jerry were phenomenal mentors. I wanted to kind of delve a little bit deeper into cultural transformation. So getting down to the specifics in terms of the messaging to the employee base early on, when you're digging into strategic and cultural change as the new CEO, is it best to just rip the Band-Aid off with that, shock and awe approach, and the employees either get on board or they don't? Or is it more deliberate when you don't upset the apple cart too much at first and you move a little more slowly? So how did you each handle that? And what were some of the considerations that drove the approach that you took? Ira, you can lead off on this one, and then we'll go to Brent.
I think you always look at something and say, in hindsight, maybe this is what I would have done a little bit different. I remember when I first took over, it was in November, and I provided the board sort of a 3-year strategy that I thought made sense, and 3 years of org charts, to be honest with you, as to how I thought the organization would evolve based on what the strategic priorities were for us. We made some significant personnel changes right away, and we had a cadence as to what that looked like for others throughout the organization, with the concept that the organization can only handle so much change management. And keep in mind, Jerry had been CEO since 1989, I believe. So it had been a long time that he had sat in that chair. As a result of focus on loyalty, we had an organization that was mediocre when it came to talent assessment and promotion throughout the organization. And you can't achieve your strategic objectives if that's what your talent pool looks like. I mean, it's great to sit there and focus on technology, which I think is something we do. But in reality, if you don't have the right people leading organizational change and striving and sort of at what Brent said, uniform in what that vision is, you're never going to execute on what your strategic objectives are. So I think we were very deliberate as to how we went about change within the organization. Communication is key. We continue to focus on that. I would argue, in hindsight, I probably should have been a little bit quicker with the Band-Aid on certain areas, ripping it off than maybe as deliberate as I intended to be. But we all learn.
Brent?
Yeah, so I would say, I was very thoughtful. At least I tried to be very thoughtful in terms of the transition. A question you get all the time is, what's going to change? Okay, well, welcome to the big chair. What's going to change? And so I led with what is not going to change, and that's our values, right? Our values are integrity, teamwork, ownership, service, simplicity, being disciplined and about what we do. Those aren't going to change. How we go about our day-to-day job, who's in what chairs, those are all things that can change. But what we do and how we deliver for our clients is not going to change. And so I thought it would be a really good idea to write a letter to every employee and sign it by hand. And I said, oh, that'll be a quick afternoon opportunity. And then I started writing notes, Mike, great to have you on the team, yada, yada, yada. And with over 2,000 employees, that ended up taking me a week. But that was a nice personal touch to reach out to each of the employees. But in that letter, I asked every employee to do two things for me. And this is all about empowerment. I said, number one, love what you do. I said, if you don't love what you do, does not make you a bad person. That's okay. And there's days that any one of us don't love our jobs, but overall, you need to love what you do. It makes a difference in your life. It makes a difference in the life of your family. It makes a difference in the life of your coworkers and in your customers, importantly as well. And if you don't like what you do, okay. Either figure out a way to change how you go about it to love what you do, or do something else. It doesn't make you a bad person. You'll be better off, and so will we. And I said, number two, after you love what you do, you're empowered to make a difference. And that's all I said. I didn't specify how to make a difference, but I wanted people to be part of the solution. I said, please feel empowered. If you're ever sitting through a meeting and you're getting nothing out of it, to get up and walk out. What a colossal waste of time to sit through a meeting and not get anything out of it. Do so politely, discreetly. Or if, for example, if I'm saying something to the company that you know is patently false, raise your hand. Do your best not to totally embarrass me, but say, perhaps this is a different way to look at it. Empower people to speak up. We are better collectively than we are individually. And so to me, those were the two things I did, and it's really been remarkable in terms of the empowerment at the bank. We've seen our voluntary turnover ratio go down from about 33% down to 17%, and the level of engagement really go up across the board, as well as our customer satisfaction.
Brian, if I could just interject there for a second. Brent's now twice focused on two key words that I think are uniform across both of our organizations: empowerment and trust. And we thought about empowerment as well as we looked at our organization. One of the challenges we had from a performance perspective was all the decisions were really made with one individual, and it's hard to leverage growth within an organization when all the decisions are made sort of in one corner office. So empowerment's great to sort of speak about from a leverage perspective, making sure your employees, as Brent mentioned, love what they do. If they're not empowered, they're not going to love what they do. Empowerment leads to delegation, but without trust, there is no delegation and there is no real empowerment. So teaching a culture of trust throughout an organization is something that we continuously harp on. We had a town hall this morning. We've been doing them every single month for a long time now. And the concept was purely trust. What does that mean from an organization perspective? And I used the quote this morning. It's interesting. If you look at the Webster's dictionary, there's a description of what trust looks like. In the Hebrew language, there's no translation for trust, right? Because trust isn't a specific word. It's aligned with individual senses. And there's 4 or 5 words in the Hebrew language that describe what trust looks like, because it's really an emotion and how you're inspiring people. And I think when you look across an organization, are you building trust? And Brent built that trust day one when he wrote a letter to every single one of his employees and took the time to personally sign it. That's where trust starts. Empowerment doesn't happen unless you have acts like that from strong leaders, or else it doesn't matter. It just becomes lip service.
Effective, guys. Learning a lot here. So broadening out the discussion maybe a little bit. So I think of there being 4 main constituencies, right, that the CEO needs to address when you embark on big changes, right? You have the customer base and the general public. That's one, not necessarily in order here, but number 2, you have the employee base, right? Number 3, you have the board. And number 4, you have Wall Street and the shareholder base. So for the CEO out there that's contemplating, either just taking over or contemplating, a monumental shift in how for his or her company, how would you guys advise laying the groundwork with each of these different constituencies, or maybe just highlight which one may be different, or is it just one message and we go out with this one message to everybody at the same time in the same way?
Yeah, Joe, that's a really good question. And I would actually add a fifth constituency, which is your regulators. Right. And whether it's the OCC, the FDIC, the Fed, the CFPB, the SEC, you name it. It's amazing the amount of time as a leader of a financial institution you need to dedicate to regulatory relationships. And we'll talk about that further, but that's a fifth constituency. And to me, the most important thing is not communicating what you're going to do to each of those constituencies, but communicating the why it makes sense. If you have a well thought out plan in terms of what you want to do and it's supported by rational argument, and reasonable people can disagree and have different perspectives, but if you can lay out the why and why this is a good thing for each of those constituents, then you can get buy-in. If you just tell people this is what we're going to do, don't ask questions, get behind me, that's where you have people talking behind your back and what are they thinking. But it goes right back to what Ira said about trust, right? Hey, I'm telling you what I want to do. I'm telling you why. And if you see holes in my thinking, talk to me about it, because together we're better. But to me, that's how you go about it with the constituency. And one of the things we try to do is really improve communications. One of the things that I've just thought for many years ate away at me, we spend millions of dollars a year marketing, and our name for many years was Washington Federal. And we did focus groups, and we put the name Washington Federal on the wall, and we said, what do you think this company does? And the number one response was part of the federal government. Number two response was a credit union. You want to talk about getting my IRA up, And so we didn't even tell the world what we did. So one of the big changes we made was to evolve the name of the bank to WaFd Bank. So when people are walking down the street, they actually know what the organization does.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of the same points that Brent just hit on. Sticking with that one succinct point or a few succinct points as to what your strategic vision is definitely across all individual stakeholders. But I think Brent hit the nail on the head when he said the why, and the why is different for each individual stakeholders. I grew up in the finance world, similar to where Brent did as well, and talking to people like you, Joe, that's basically said, here's why you think about Valley from your perspective. And I remember one of my first town halls, I got in front of 700-800 people and told them why executing on the strategic vision was good for them. And I walked them through an investor deck. And I sat there after myself and I said, man, that was a horrible presentation because I didn't speak to their why, right? And I think if we learned anything from COVID, the alignment of our personal why and our corporate purpose is more succinct than ever. And understanding that as a CEO becomes really critical in understanding who we're talking to and connecting to their why. If you can't connect to their why, then as Brent said, there's no trust. And it's much harder to really move forward within a succinct direction.
But one thing I would follow up on that, Ira and I are clearly aligned. But the key also is you have the strategic vision, you explain what you're going to do and why. But then you go to execute, and it doesn't always happen flawlessly. And you need to be honest and forthright where you haven't hit the mark where you thought you were going to, and explain why. People can understand when you don't have flawless execution, but you have to build that credibility, that trust, and say, yeah, it didn't work exactly as we planned, and we're going to learn from that going forward.
Guys, for banks like yours that I think have been really successful in developing a distinctive culture, a lot of it seems to revolve around improving the customer experience. Even 10 years ago, aside from trailblazers like First Republic, for instance, measurements of customer employee satisfaction just weren't emphasized. It just seems ridiculous now to think, and me on Wall Street and others, were guilty of this as well. We reward companies, their deposit service charges would pop up because they figured out new and inventive ways to charge their customers without the customer knowing, right, or realizing, and it would just infuriate people. It is across purposes, right? Both of you guys, though, in your most recent annual reports, I think Brent this year and Ira last year, talked about the customer experience, your improvement in net promoter scores, and Wall Street starting to pay attention, right? I'm going to give a shout out here to Steve Alexopoulos at JP Morgan, who's really been a leader in that regard, right? I have to think there's a linkage there to the culture you've developed your organization that encourages your employees just to have that relentless focus on the customer and enhancing that experience. Am I overstating that? And maybe it's more of a natural cause and effect of having a healthy culture, or was it deliberate? And if so, how did you guys go about fostering that sort of mentality?
I hear Brett's answer first. He seems to have all the answers to this stuff.
No, okay, going off a script, Ira. We'll come back to that one.
I want to ad-lib a little bit to what you're going to say, Brent. Come on.
So here's the really interesting thing is we've evolved a great deal over the years. 2 CEOs ago, we were opposed to implementing ATMs because literally the company philosophy is, why would we want to give customers more opportunity to withdraw their funds? That's a direct quote. Right. So people really did business with us in spite of our technology, in spite of our products. And Ira, you'll appreciate this. When I got to the bank in 2001, our efficiency ratio was 17%. We were the most efficient bank or thrift in the United States of America. And it showed in our products. We have very, very little in the way of product offering. We didn't even offer checking accounts. We had no ATMs. Right. So during my tenure, we've had a great opportunity to evolve and improve. And our efficiency ratio is nowhere near where it was. We're right at a 60% efficiency ratio. But we've made huge strides in terms of the client experience. And that's what I think is a huge realization that you need to have as a management team and as a board. People aren't buying products. People are buying experiences.
Yeah.
Right? So if you want to just deliver a product, it can be an ugly product, that's just fine. If you want to deliver an experience, you need to continually invest in that experience. And it goes to the product mindset. You need to be continually reinventing that. So just a quick example. Historically, we viewed our website as, a must-have. We would pay a consultant, build the fancy website, and then we'd hand it over to our marketing team and say, okay, keep this updated with names and phone numbers, put some nice graphics on it, put links to the 10K, yada, yada, yada. 2 years ago, if you went to our website, wafedbank.com, and put it in your search engine and opened it up, it took 8 seconds to open that website. 8 seconds. That's an eternity in today's day and age. There's statistics that show there's a 50% abandonment rate after 4 seconds, right? So we said, okay, let's change that. The website is the front door to everything. It's front door to online banking. It's front door to new customers coming to the bank. That is your new headquarters. We now have a team of 5 engineers that do nothing but optimize our website. And I'd encourage everyone to go to wafedbank.com. Today, we are the number 2 banking website in the United States in terms of speed. It's 0.4 seconds. The only one faster is JP Morgan Chase. They spend $11 billion a year on technology, right? So it's those kinds of things that matter. And as a result, our net promoter score has gone from 17 to 34 to 48 to 51. Ultimately, are your customers appreciating the products you're delivering, the experience that you're delivering for them, and are they willing to recommend their friends?
Amazing, guys, right? But on Brent's point about products, just think of the gold standard in banking even 10 years ago. It was Wells Fargo, right? And not to pick on them, but it was the exact wrong approach, right? All about selling the most products to the customer, right? Without regard to the experience they were having. Anyway, that just struck me from what you said, Brent. But Ira, sorry to jump ahead of you.
I couldn't be more aligned with what Brent's saying. We spend a lot of time on what that customer experience is. In the end, we operate in an industry that's very commoditized, and we're selling and buying the exact same thing. So the only differentiation comes from that experience. And I'm sure Brent would agree, the value in our organizations is our customers. That's our franchise value. That's it. It's not the assets we have on a balance sheet. It's not the buildings we have. The value is our customers and the employees that we have servicing them. So we spend a lot of time changing what the risk culture looks like within the organization. I think the regulators did get it right here when they think about risk appetite. That's important from a regulatory perspective. But when you think about it from an organizational customer experience, it inadvertently drives a lot of the experiences that you have or don't want to have with your customers. So we spend a lot of time not just on risk appetite, but what does risk culture really mean to an individual in their day-to-day operations? We think about fraud limits we have in place. Is that risk culture driven or led with the customer experience, or is it driven and led with a regulator experience? And in our organization where we came from, Jerry Lipton was great at values, ethics, and many things. But as you know, Joe, Jerry was a former regulator, right? And established protocols, processes, procedures in place that were very regulator driven, that weren't customer centric. So it required a massive shift within the organization to rethink risk culture. And that change in risk culture then, in my mind, has led to some of the significant improvements within our customer experience. Now, changing it's day one. How do you measure and monitor across the entire organization what that customer experience looks like? So NPS score does a good job in managing or monitoring loyalty. We look at CSAT scores that look at individual products and what the customer satisfaction is on that. Across the entire organization, we look at C scores, which are customer effort scores. So it's not only can somebody execute on a specific product, but to Brent's point, how long did it take him to do that? It's great that I can go to a website, but if it took me 8 seconds, it's max effort, right? And that's not that great. To Brent's point, the effort matters as well, right? So that 0.4 seconds is really critical from an effort perspective. So we have standards across the entire organization, external as well as internal, to make sure that we're measuring and monitoring each of those individual experiences. Not that we're metric driven across everything, but there needs to be an understanding that this is a sincere focus for the organization. We've embedded it into our executive compensation programs as well. So we lead with our pockets when we think about customer experience.
If I could just follow up on one thing Ira mentioned, I think he's dead on. Many banks come from a risk perspective. But however, what we talked about in terms of trust, that's paramount with your clients. So you think about it traditionally, you deposit a check. Well, what's a check hold? And what we're trying to do is change the entire paradigm. Instead of, okay, we're going to put a hold on everyone's check, to, you know what, there's really only about 3% of our clients that we need to put holds on their checks. The other 97%, it's a good risk to take. Mm-hmm. But that's a huge paradigm shift. And then that leads into technology, because even though you want to do that, you may not be able to do it from a technology standpoint. But I think that's exactly what Ira said is right, is not having a regulatory perspective. I'm going to minimize risk and make everybody go through all of these, hurdles. But hey, I'm going to make the people that need to go through the hurdles go through the rules, and everybody else, I'm going to expedite their process.
Great point. Ryan?
Yeah, well, we obviously are talking about technology quite a bit. Brent, I think you talked publicly in your recent shareholder letter about this being a generational opportunity for WaFd bankers, to kind of stand out in the sense that the pandemic was a real moment for the company to walk the talk, so to speak. It made me think also of that Travillian Q&A we did with you last year and your marketing communications coordinator, Brad Good, about that ambitious small business lifeline program that you set up. It was, pretty amazing success. Further, I think Joe was telling me that you had never previously made an SBA loan, but still just under half the loans that were made to clients were new to the bank. And then on the other end of it, Ira, you guys at Valley have been hugely successful in meeting the challenge as well. Joe mentioned, he was on the road with you before and during the pandemic, where some of the processes and new products that you put into place really enhanced your ability to be responsive to customer needs. And the culture you fostered has had to have helped this kind of can-do attitude at both your organizations. So my question is, can you talk about the key ingredients that have enabled each of the companies to sort of rise above the crowd in response to this pandemic? And then what do you see as the longer term opportunity here as we come out of this? And I guess we can flip a coin if you want this time. We'll go with Ira if you want to start.
I didn't mess up the flow.
It's
sorry,
okay.
Brent. I'm going to owe you a drink when I see you.
Yes, you will.
And I think once again, we're probably going to have a very similar answer here. Look, it starts with culture and it starts with your individual vision. We were very succinct in what vision we thought made sense. We identified early on when we first took over that technology was changing the industry and we needed to be much more agile and adaptive and control our own destiny as to how we thought about technology. We outlined a pretty aggressive $48 million plan on top of what we currently spend on technology to provide an infrastructure that provides the agility that enables a different customer experience. So when PPP came around, we had two different options. We could work with a vendor to have them deliver what a customer experience looked like, or we could deliver our own customer experience that sort of fit with what the experience is that we strive for. So within a 2-week period, we built a front-end module that then backed into our core processor, which was a function of the technology that we had been investing for a long period of time, but was really the ability of the talented people that we've hired and the empowerment that they had to really execute. We then worked through the night, obviously, in serving 13,000 PPP loans. Our market share should have been, I think, 4 to 5,000. We did $2.3 billion. Market share should have been $780 million. So the ability to execute far beyond what our number statistics should have been is a function of the culture that we created. People weren't working till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning in our organization because Ira told them to work till 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. They were working there because, once again, there was an aligned purpose with their professional purpose and their personal why. They wanted to work to 2, 3 o'clock in the morning because they understand the impact that we had and the impact that we had on those that were around us and the connection with our individual communities. And you spoke earlier, Joe, about the individual stakeholders. 4, Brent correctly meant, adjusted you to 5. But they're all aligned, they're all connected, right? And making sure that everyone understood that your personal why as to why you come to work every single day is connected to your community why. That's part of the reason why people are working until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. So our responsibility is to provide the infrastructure, provide the environment, and give people the capacity to execute.
Yeah, not surprisingly, we're very well aligned on this. I won't go through our entire PPP story, but to say, call me old-fashioned. I believe banking is a noble profession. And, coming out of the Great Recession, we as bankers had several black eyes, deservedly so in some instances, but in many cases it was the bad actors and we all got the reputation. And we can have all the values we want up on the wall, on our website, so forth. But really what matters is, when can you live those values? And that's what I said, it's a generational opportunity for us to live the values. And literally we had people working 20 hours a day, three consecutive weeks, not taking a break for Easter Sunday. Why? To be able to help people that were in desperate need. And it was some of the most fulfilling moments I've had in my career. I've had employees in tears about it, that they were able to help. And it didn't matter, just check your title at the door. We didn't have time to do all these fancy org charts, this, that, or the other. We had a mission, and the mission was to make as many PPP loans as we could to help people. And it was awesome. One of the best things that we've ever done to build our culture. Now, if I could pivot from PPP and talk a little bit about technology. Terrible legacy technology is the soft underbelly of banking, right? I mean, why did AIG not fail? AIG didn't fail because they couldn't get all the systems together so they knew exactly what all the exposures were, right? So they had to keep it going together, right? It's crazy to me, right? I mean, and it's not just banking. I go to Costco and, I want to, I don't have my card with me, so I'm at the cashier. I'm like, just look me up on the system. No, sir, that's on a different system. You have to go over to the other counter because that's on the AS400 system, right? And the problem with technology is one system doesn't talk to another system. And as regional community banks and even, large regional banks, we are dependent upon our vendors, and the technology is less than ideal. And there's, 3 or 4 vendors that you can go with. And so what we did is we recognized that, hey, we have a problem. And we're not going to fix that problem by reinventing the wheel, doing the same thing, just with a different perspective. We have to think outside the box. And so for us, we were very, very fortunate to recruit a board member, Steve Singh, who's probably one of the top 50 technologists in the world. He was the co-founder of Concur Technologies, which is the expense management software. He took that from an idea, let's just automate something everybody has to do and hates the way they do it, to a company that they sold to SAP for $8 billion. Take something simple, it's just like Shark Tank. Take a simple idea and you'll help everybody out, and you'll have a product. And so the great news is I'm not a technologist. I know what we think the client experience wants to be, but how to make it happen. Now we have an ally on our board that can help us say, yeah, this is doable, or no, this is not doable. And it's great to have someone when the technology partners come back and say, okay, we'll do that implementation in 18 months. He can laugh at them like I can and say, you've lost your mind. The world changes so much in 18 months. I can't tell you if that's what we're going to want to do in 18 months. But you can't boil the ocean at once. So you need to recognize what you can do and what you can't do. And our way of approaching it is we've segregated our IT function between two groups. One that really runs the bank, runs the software, manages the vendors, all the different pieces, and one that develops software for us. And really, the key for us is we're using MuleSoft as an integration layer to connect all the systems. It used to be that everything around banking was built around the core, but now the core feeds into our data lake that we have in AWS. We used to be overwhelmed by the amount of data that we have. Now we realize the amount of data we have is just a fraction of what we need, right? We want to know when Joe comes into the branch, what branches he utilizes, what parts of the website he goes to. So that way, when Joe comes in and says, I want a mortgage loan, we don't have to say, okay, here's a PDF, fill it out. We can say, Joe, here are the 4 mortgage loans you qualify for. Which do you want?
So I was sticking with that theme. And one of you guys mentioned it earlier, both of you guys grew up on the finance side of the house. Brent, you were CFO for a long time. Ira, you were reporting up through Alan in the finance function for a while. Yet both of you have made this technological, enhancing technological capabilities a main focus. So I've got a similar analytical and finance background, but I feel like if I were a CEO, and even if I recognize the gap in my firm's technological capabilities, I have no idea where to, who do I go to help fix that? Sorry about that. It's not my background. So maybe talk to us, Brent, like how did you guys acquire in such a short period of time? Were you guys like kind of learning while you were in the finance role, the kind of how to, speak the language of technology and recognize where the gaps were? How'd you acquire the skill set? How'd you do it so quickly? And where did you find the talent to kind of be a leader in this area?
Like all things in life, to me, it's intellectual curiosity. It's seeing what's out there and, kind of scratching your head and reading about it, diving in and utilizing it, right? But the reality is this little device has changed the world. The way our companies have done business for so long, we're not going to be able to do it the same way. And so we can either sit and watch our business atrophy away, or we can evolve. And it's figuring out how we want to evolve. And it's being part of the conversations at fintechs. And I think one of the things in technology that we have to do better at as banks, and it's against our DNA, it kills us. We have to be willing to fail, right? One of the questions I love in interviews is, tell me where you failed before and what did you learn from it, right? It's just like venture capital, right? The reason there's so many successful fintechs is there's a lot out there that start up and fail. We only see what succeeds. And in banking, we are so risk adverse, we are only going to do something that we're sure is going to be a home run. So it's changing that mindset. And obviously we don't want to fail big, but we have to be willing to fail. And that's a cultural shift for many, many banks. And so from our perspective, we have 2 board members that were on the board of Concur, obviously Steve Singh and another board member, Randy Talbot. They understood that, but they also understand that banks aren't venture capital firms and we have a different risk profile. But they've encouraged us to go out there and experiment. And they don't want us to bat 1,000, because if we bat 1,000, that means we're passing on too many good opportunities that could really enhance our customer experience. But they've encouraged us to fail small and fail early, right? Those are the 2 things. We don't want to be 3 years down the process and decide that it's a failure. But no, experiment. That's okay to experiment. So to me, that's what it's experimentation. It's being out there, seeing what's happening. And really, it's the advantage of technology. Right? How cool is it that a bank our size or Ira's size, we can compete toe-to-toe with JP Morgan Chase or Wells Fargo with commercial accounts? Because we have the advantage, we can be nimble. As hard as it is for us to integrate technology and make changes, it is so much harder for a JP Morgan or a Wells Fargo, you name it. And that's really where I think community and regional banks have to be. It's about relationships, but it's about being nimble, and being nimble with technology. And PPP is another great example of that.
I mean, I think everything Brent said is totally spot on, right? Fail fast is something we think about a lot here. And I think, Brent spoke about it from a broad perspective, but it really was diversity of thought in bringing in someone from a technology perspective that really enabled them to really move forward. I think that's something we try to do within our organization. Everyone doesn't look like me. Everyone doesn't have the same background as me. And they're very different in some of our conversations. And it's okay to have that different dialogue and discussion as to how we move forward. But Brent's conversation about understanding what our value proposition is as our size organization and the agility that comes with that. We're relationship banks. But by the way, the relationship that's defined today may not be the relationship as to what that customer wants a year from now, 6 months from now, based on the changing. And if we don't have the infrastructure and support to change what that experience looks like, then we're going to go back into atrophy, just like what Brent said before. So when we think about technology, in my mind, technology should support and enhance a relationship, not the other way around, or there's no differentiation for us. So similar to stuff that Brent's done, when you think about MuleSoft, when you think about the data lakes, we spent an insane amount of money on that. In my mind, customer experience, customer experience, customer experience. And there is no way Fiserv, FIS, or Jack Henry is going to define our customer experience. We have to. And for us to define what that customer experience looks like, we have to own the technology and that delivery piece of it, not the building of the technology, but we have to own the flexibility and agility. And that's key as to how we think about what our technology roadmap looks like. And gone are the days from my perspective where Fiserv is going to tell me this is the vendor I need to use. This is the way I need to connect with my customer. In the end, I'm no different than any other organization.
Ira mentioned something that I've told our reps at the software companies. I never again want to hear that something's on your roadmap. That's what they tell you when they don't have it, and it's not going to be there for many, many years. All right, either you show me where it's going to be in a production release in the next couple of months, or I don't want to hear about it.
Great points, guys. Just curious, you both obviously have a lot of similarities to your stories. You're both long-time insiders of the company before you took over. And both companies, while you can argue that change was needed, they were companies that were generally very well regarded, right? Valley, I remember Jerry saying, I remember at every roadshow, we've never had a losing quarter in 100 years, right? Even when you guys had to write down the preferreds in 08 and the crisis, right? And Brent, you guys, since you went public, never had a losing year. So these weren't recapitalizations, right? Where it was just total management failure. Where I would argue it'd probably be easier to come in and just, have a clean slate and everybody has to go along because there's no defense to how we used to do things. Is a cultural shift, I'm saying this for maybe the benefit of CEOs out there listening that are thinking about this, is a cultural shift more difficult in the situations you guys inherited because there weren't like such huge monumental problems? And if so, how did you deal with that?
I'll go ahead and start with this one. I don't think there's any question. If it's a recap or somebody's having massive asset quality issues, it's much easier to explain the why in terms of the cultural shift. When you're coming into a situation that Valley had or the situation we had, why do you need to change? So it's much more nuanced. And to me, the answer was to acknowledge that what we had is a phenomenal thing. And, they've built the foundation for us to take it to the next step, but the world changes, right? I mean, technology changes, how we shop today is different. I mean, things change. And if we don't change, we will be left behind. And back to what I originally said, what you have to focus on is what will be the same as our values. And I think, and one of the questions I think we're hopefully going to get to is, what does banking look in the future? Banking has been around since the beginning of man, right? People that have things, save them, and then you need to borrow them out. We're financial intermediaries. Will that need to exist 50 years from now? Absolutely it will. How we do that, how that's delivered, has to evolve. And I think that's where the nuanced message is to our employees that, oh, by the way, if we choose not to evolve, our destiny won't be in our own hands. We won't control our own destiny. So let's be aggressive. Let's lean into this. Let's experiment. Let's not be afraid to fail. And here's the upside for everyone, all of our constituents.
I would absolutely agree. Jerry was an icon within the banking industry. He'd been here for so long. And like you said, Valley never had a losing quarter ever in its 90 years. That was the hallmark of the organization. But I'd argue, what does relevancy look like to our constituency? What does relevancy look like to an employee that worked here? What does relevancy look like to any one of our stakeholders, to a customer? And I would say that it wasn't necessarily aligned with sort of where we had the strategic vision of the organization, or what our value proposition was. What's our reason and purpose to even exist today? And I think redefining what that purpose is and getting alignment as to what we think our value proposition is, and moving us forward with something that was pretty significant as to where we focused our overall resources on. Stephen Oxopoulos wrote something, I think, when I first took over as CEO. Most inside CEOs, I think, fail in changing culture within an organization. Man, I took that and plugged it up on a town hall and said, the analysts don't even think that we can succeed as to what we're looking at doing within the organization, because it's hard. I mean, we literally changed out almost every single one within our management team. Everyone's gone. We literally turned over in the first couple of years 650, 700 on an annual basis of all of our employees. And it was a balance of understanding what was the skill set we needed, while still investing in making sure we gave people opportunities within the organization. And we spent an insane amount of money and focus on leadership development within the organization. But our organization needed to shift from mediocre managers to amazing leaders within the organization. And there's a distinction between what a manager does and what a leader does. And our focus was really primarily on making sure we had leaders that inspired within the organization to achieve greatness. Like, I sit there and tell our staff every single day, I don't wake up and take a breath to be the same that I was yesterday. I wake up to be better today than what I was yesterday. And everyone within our organization should have that entire mindset. And if they don't, then they're working for the wrong organization.
Well, and that parlays, Ira, straight to the next section. We're going to jump around a little bit due to time, but recruitment, that's Travillian's bailiwick. By the way, we had Colin Gilbert on a webinar not long ago, a fantastic recruit to Valley Bank. She's terrific. But I wanted to understand, both you and Brent, how your respective organizations have created and modified recruitment and retention strategies. I mean, it's a competitive market for talent right now, as we know. And your banks have been scaling. Also, Ira, your bank is large in the Northeast. It's got southeastern exposure. Brent, you're all over the Pacific Northwest. So, what we hear from candidates is empowerment. It's exactly what you said: empowerment, collaboration. These types of cultures where voices are heard are most important. So maybe, let our viewers know how you properly measure and execute on the talent needs of your many divisions and geographies. Ira, if you want to go first.
Yeah, look, when I get asked a lot, what keeps me up at night? I get asked by my board. I get asked by people when I go on the road and talk to them. Failing my employees is what keeps me up at night. I believe I have a personal commitment to help them achieve their professional aspirations. And if we haven't done that as an organization, create the environment for them to do that, then we failed. And I think as we think about that and understand what our responsibilities are to our employees, we then build a culture that really supports their individual growth, which is something that we strive on. We sit down and we spend more time talking about succession planning and career development in our organization than anything else. And I have a finance background. I have an economics background. These aren't things I should be focused on from my experience, right? I should be focused on the numbers. This is what I'm good at. It doesn't happen. It's focused on employees and making sure that we are providing a path for them, taking an interest in them, executive coaching, leadership development, programs that sort of speak to what they want. Engagement across our organization has doubled versus where it was previously. We went down to Florida in 2014. No one even knew about us. Today, for us to hire in Florida, we are an employer of choice because of how we treat our people, because of giving them the ability to make decisions at a local level and trusting them. And if they mess up, it happens. Learn from it. Let's move forward, right? And make sure that it's consistent with the values and ethics of who we are. But I think taking a priority first when it comes to our employees is something that's critical. And when you really feel that, believe it, and breathe it, then you actually live it.
Yeah, he's right on. I mean, our ultimate goal, what we have, our vision 2025, is to become the employer of choice in terms of banks. If you look out there today in the tech world, that's Amazon. Everybody wants to work at Amazon. Why do they want to work at Amazon? It's exciting, right? People are engaged. You're allowed to go off and do all kinds of crazy stuff and see what works, right? Reinvent the world is what they've done with AWS, perfect example. And they pay their people very well. People want to win. So that's who we ultimately want to be as an employer of choice. And Brian, you're not going to like to hear this. My goal is we have people lined up to want to come to work for us, right? And I find it happening, right? When you empower people, because people tell their colleagues, they talk about it on LinkedIn, they see what's happening. They see, podcasts like this, they see us on CNBC, they see us telling our story, and they say, wow, I didn't know a bank could do that. Right? I mean, it's thinking outside the box and how can we be part of the solution? Banking is a noble profession, but you have to make sure that your values as a bank align with those people that you're recruiting, right? There's a lot of people, nothing against them, that focus solely on the short term. If somebody's focused solely on the short term, they're not a good fit for us, right? We don't do earnings call. We're one of the only publicly traded banks in the country that doesn't do an earnings call. Joe never liked that. But why is that? Because when you do an earnings call, you over exaggerate the short term and you undervalue the long term. And we're long-term thinkers, right? So we want our employees to be long-term thinkers. We don't sell our loans. So you're going to make better loans if you have to collect those loans. Every single employee of the bank participates in stock options, everyone. And there's no secret in terms of how much Brent gets versus this person. Everybody gets 2% of their salary in stock options each year. They're 10-year options. And if we do our job, those stock options should pay for their kids' college, right? It's thinking long-term. And if the employee contributes 4% to their 401k, WaFd Bank contributes 11%. I don't know another company that's that rich of a 401k. It's thinking long-term. It's aligning values. It's becoming that employer of choice. And people will take less in the short term if you say, hey, here's what you're going to get in the long term, and here's how you're going to be able to benefit your clients. They don't want to just be part of a cog that they can't make a difference.
Great points, guys. Maybe one final question, two-parter for each of you guys. Brent, you alluded to the future of banking, so I'll ask you what you think it looks like. I know it's almost impossible to say, like you said, 18 months out, but talk to us about the next 5 to 10 years. What would surprise our viewers to hear about what the future might look like? What do versions 2.0 and 3.0 of WaFd look like, and Valley? And then lastly, just guys, companies you admire or individuals you admire in the business, not just banks, maybe anybody, non-bank financial services companies, fintechs. So a lot there. Maybe if you guys can each tackle that two-parter.
Yeah, I'll start off with the first part, and then we can go back and forth, if you will. I'm getting old when I forget the first question. Now, what does banking look like 10 or 20 years from now? The scary thing is, if you ask a teenager, a 20-something, why should they put their money in the bank? They have no idea, right? We're losing a whole generation of people that know why you put money in a bank, and that's FDIC insurance, right? So it scares me, right? Jamie Dimon, in his 68-page letter that he put out this morning, said banks are becoming less relevant. That's absolutely true. What's becoming more relevant? Cryptocurrencies, right? For good and bad. We're under a BSA consent order. I laugh all the time that the bad guys aren't going to launder money through WaFd in significant portions. They're going to do it through crypto. That's where it's happening, and it's completely unregulated. It's a Wild West. The fact that Bitcoin has $1 trillion valuation, they don't make money. It's a store of value, right? But that's me looking and saying, okay, Brent, you're being old-fashioned. I think cryptocurrencies are going to be here in one way, shape, or form. So I think the banking sector has to embrace cryptocurrency. We have to embrace blockchain, and those banks that understand that and enable their clients to be able to transact in the digital highways of the future. That's what banking is going to look like. And I think you need an absolute integration between banks and the accounting systems of your customers. right? We should be gone with the day of, okay, tell us what you made last year, tell us your covenant compliance. It should be an exact integration, right? The technology's there. Let's move forward.
I would wholeheartedly agree with what Brent just said. Look, our value propositions, the relationship that we provide, the advice that we provide, the trusted advice that we provide, the experience that we provide, it's not the currency, that's a commodity, and someone else is going to do that better than us. So our focus has to be on not attempting to theoretically design exactly what the future of banking looks like, but provide an agile environment that provides us to really move as we see different shifts happening. And I think that's what each of us are doing when you think about the infrastructures that we've created. Understanding our customers is the franchise value we have, and our ability to serve that customer and maintain an understanding of what he or she is looking to do on an individual basis and on a professional basis, and link them together. Challenge the norms, I think, is something that we need to continuously do as well. And I think that's really what relevancy looks like for us.
Then a couple of names, guys, each in the last couple seconds here that people you admire, companies you admire.
Well, after this phone call, Valley Bank's number one on my list.
I'm going to go with Brent as well.
No, and I'm not kidding. Seriously, I have a great deal of respect for what Valley has done and how they've done it and how hard it is what Ira and team are trying to do. But the names in the financial sector that I respect the most, U.S. Bank, I think they have consistently done it right. They've done a phenomenal job of building their non-interest income. Frost Bank, somebody down in Texas who I have a great deal of admiration for their credit culture, the consistency that they go about things. And then a bank on the West Coast that I think very highly of is First Republic Bank. Clearly, they've carved out a niche for themselves, but it's a phenomenal niche, and their customers love what they do for them. So those are three names in the financial services sector that I look up to.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I think you can sit there and name a litany of different banks. I think what Brent started with, values, ethics, and culture, in my mind, those are synonymous across any individual industry. And those are the things that I aspire to really look forward to as to where we want to move our organization. I remember when I first graduated college, I read a bunch of books on Warren Buffett and said, this is what I'm going to aspire to be based on what he did. And then I realized I can never follow in those specific footsteps because we don't have the same types of experiences. Then you go down this path and that path. And ultimately, you just need to be internally true to who you are as a person and what you want your aspirations to be, and lead your company in that direction. And it may not be aligned with what someone else has done in their organization, but that's fine. You're the one that has to look yourself in the mirror and sleep at night. And if you feel good doing that, if you feel good about making sure that you put your employees, your customers, your stakeholders first, then that's what we should all be aspiring to really do.
If I could just follow up on that, I sat down with Lloyd Blankfein from Goldman right before he retired. And I said, you were one of the CEOs at the table, the Federal Reserve, in that night in 2008 with TARP, going back, what regrets do you have? And he said, in all honesty, Brent, I don't have any regrets. And my first reaction was, how conceited? Are you kidding me? All the mistakes that you've made, I can point out 15 of them to you. But he was actually very humble about it. He's like, listen, I've made a lot of mistakes, but I've always made the best decision with the best information I had available at the time. And I'm not going to go back and kick myself in hindsight. And I think that's exactly, we need to have our values, have what's important to us, have our mission as to why we're doing it, but make the best decision you can and move forward and live life without regrets, I think is really a good piece of advice.
Guys, it's been an illuminating discussion, to say the least. It's been great reconnecting with you guys. Really appreciate you doing this. I can keep going all day with questions, but that's about all the time we have. We already ran a few minutes over. So want to thank you guys, Ira, Brent, taking the time to be with us. Brian, any closing remarks before we say goodbye here?
Yeah, no, very inspirational stuff there at the end, Ira and Brent. And I just want to say thank you once again for joining us. We've greatly enjoyed hearing about what makes Valley and WaFd such special organizations in terms of the values, culture, communication, and the talent management. It's clear both of you have passion for empowering and developing and trusting. It's a word I heard a lot, trusting your people, aligning yourselves to their whys. I think that's a takeaway I have here, as well as customer needs. That's what leads, the innovation of your banks. So this has all led to tremendous success, and best of luck to both of you in your future endeavors. And And to our audience, thank you so much for joining us. Take care and have a great day.